Yo, all right. Sorry, I had to do some cleanup. I had to do a little bit of setup. How's everybody doing today? I am so glad that you could join us. I'm gonna have to connect. Here we go. Can I not see it? Oh, whatever. How's everybody doing today? I am trying to connect to my live stream so I can see it, but yeah, it's all good. Not gonna worry about it. We're gonna move on. Thank y'all for coming out. I am today. What we're going to do is doing something special. I haven't been up here in a while, but I started a book club. I started a book club, and the name of the book club is Freedom Library. The idea here is that every month I read a book, I let you guys know what we're doing, and then at the end of that month, we talk about it. We talk about it. I discuss it. I discuss it in depth. The book that was recommended to me was the um, Radio Free Dixie, which is a book about Robert Williams and his contributions to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement at large. So what I've done is I set up a bit of an itinerary where I tell you guys what's going on, what this book was about. Um, I'm in its history. Like the idea of spoilers on a history book is silly. Like what are you expecting? Of course there are spoilers. It's a history book. The whole thing is about spoilers. So I'm going to just go through. We're going to hit the high notes. We're going to explain what this book is about, and just hit the keynotes. Get it in an hour, and then we're going to get you up out of here. We're going to get you in, and get you out of here. All right. So um, the book that we covered was, of course, Radio Free Dixie, Robert F. Williams and his roots in the Black Power movement, and it was done by a man by the name of Timothy B. Tyson. It was recommended to me, and I wasn't familiar with him. Apparently, he worked at Duke University at some point, which is here in North Carolina. Um, but I was a little shocked to find out that he was a white man. Like, no disrespect, I just was shocked. I didn't really know that you were going to be white. Um, but the interesting thing is that I was already aware of him and his work before, because he did a book on Emmett Till, and he was the last person to speak to, or the last reporter to speak to, Carolyn Bryant, who was the woman that accused Emmett Till of wolf whistling, costing whatever happened in that store in 1955. He spoke to her, and he was the one that got the evidence that basically said that whatever happened in that store he didn't deserve what happened to him, basically stating that the whole thing was a lie. So it's interesting, at least for me, a little tie in to Timothy B. Tyson, and the fact that I was aware of him a little bit. Set level expectations. We're not gonna go through this whole book. I'm just gonna hit the high notes. We're just hitting the high notes, and we're gonna land, and we're gonna land this plane. Even though I enjoyed it, immensely, because one of the great things about this book is that it's based in North Carolina, and not only is it based in North Carolina, it's based like up the street. It is based 30 minutes away from where I live. There are people in this book that I am aware of. I could ask my dad about certain people. He was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that person. They was like this, and they were this, and they were that, and they, because um, my grandfather was loosely involved in politics here in North Carolina, and they grew up middle class. So they ran in the same circles as many of the people in this book. So he's aware of some of those people. And I could ask him about it. He didn't have like any secrets. There were no secrets. But he did remember, like, um I think I can't remember his name right now, but one of the guys, like, they lived right up the street. They lived right up the street. They lived in the same black neighborhood together. Anyway, um, so the basic idea about what this book is about, while it is kind of a biography about the life of Robert Williams, his life mimics the greater black experience during the time period that he was pretty active, which is around 1936 up until around the early 70s when he left for exile in Cuba. But up until that point, a lot of the things that happened in his life were exactly what people were experiencing in that time, because he did a lot. He had done a lot of things. Even back, because even the foreword, before they even get started, the introduction talks about how in 1936, when he was 11 years old, he watched a police officer savagely bleed a black woman on a public street in Monroe, North Carolina. And he remembers how the people around him, the white people, were laughing at the incident, and that the black men were like, I don't want to be next. Let me go hide. And that very much stuck with him most of his life. And you can see how this incident shaped how he wanted to go about the rest of his life. Because this book, a huge component of this book is not just about a huge component of this book is not just about the civil rights movement and whether or not to use guns, but protection, mostly about black women, because during the civil rights movement, and said many, many times that, black women are the most unprotected. And that book reflects that. A lot of the choices that he made is an attempt to not just to protect his family, but protect the community of black women around him at large. And this moment was when that kind of crystallized in his mind. But also the sheriff, the police officer, Jesse Helms Sr., the father of Jesse Alexander Helms, the senator here, who was a grade A piece of shit, and who I did not know was from Monroe, North Carolina, and had no idea his father was a police officer. He had the nickname of the sharpest boot in the city. I mean, talk about the apple falling straight down from the tree, like right down on the ground. Like Jesse Helms was not a good person. He's not. And his father wasn't either. Anyway, moving along. Another key component of this book is basically about the modern civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and how, if you're familiar, it seems like they were like, hey, the modern civil rights movement, that ain't working. Let's do something different. But in actuality, they actually kind of grew up simultaneously, and throughout the book, this is one of the things that Robert Williams was arguing for, was not really about the same things as the Black Power movement, but a lot of the ideological things that they believed in was the things that he was talking about, And so when like talking about him being the president of the local NAACP and having his own gun club, and he had an armed militia that he would use to protect the community with, these are ideas that are fundamental to the Panthers, some of the things that they believed in, and that kind of brings you back to, like, once again, this book was, builds itself on the idea of self-defense versus nonviolence, and that trade-off. And even he will tell you that he wasn't necessarily a violent person. While he did have guns, while Robert Williams did have guns, he didn't really want to use them. He understood what would happen if they ran around following the police with guns, like very similar to how the Black Panthers started. What would happen, especially in a southern town like Monroe, North Carolina. Now he would end up being labeled, the aggressive black man, the less aggressive guy in the room, but that was a label that he didn't really seek to acquire. And to that point, and this is one of the things about this book that's really interesting to me, is that he was a bigger player in the civil rights movement, especially in the early 50s, in the early mid 50s, going into the 60s, than even I was aware after reading this book, because he he had a debate, not if in-person debate, but a written debate with Martin Luther King Jr. about just this very thing about nonviolence versus self-defense. You know, like, this is the kind of guy that he was. I mean, I don't know if he saw himself as an adversary, because even in the book, he talks about how um, he respected Martin Luther King. He just felt like um, absolute nonviolence leaves you open, leaves you defended, leaves you defenseless. Um, the book also highlights this idea of white supremacy, especially Monroe was obsessed with protecting white womanhood while simultaneously terrorizing black women and children. And this is one of the things that he seeks to expose globally, because in 1958 they have what's a kissing case, which is basically two black boys were jailed and beating for kissing a white woman, a white girl, a little white girl during a game. And by framing the way he framed this injustice and the specific failures of democracy, he realized that the battle was not just about voting rights. It was not just about fundamental rights, but it was about public safety, and it's about public safety and autonomy and autonomy. And granted, we'll go a bit into the kissing case a little bit more in depth later, because I'm gonna hit the key points. um, Now, this is something. This next point, this key case, was something that I was very much unaware of, and this is something that within the movement, it's kind of like the movement within the movement. A lot of the civil rights groups at the time um, didn't really attract the working class black folks. The you know, so the idea, especially of the NAACP, was that the NAACP was a middle class organization. It was for the bougie upper crust of black people, the people they attracted, were the teachers and business owners and things like that. And a lot of um, when Robert Williams took over as the president of the NAACP chapter, that's the people that he attracted. That's the people he attempted to attract: domestic workers, sharecroppers, World War II veterans, people who were like him, who were like him. And this kind of turned him away from the larger establishment, especially the NAACP's global leadership, because they really didn't understand. They didn't understand Robert Williams. They didn't understand him at all. They felt like his ideology did not match with what they were what they were trying to go, what they were trying to portray, which was mostly nonviolence. But even then, after Brown versus Board of Education, they really didn't have they were, it's probably gonna come up later, but anyway, after Brown versus the Board of Education, the White Citizen Council, the Ku Klux Klan, government at large, deemed the NAACP basically public enemy number one. They were working very difficult to dismantle the NAACP. So what was happening is they had something called economic freeze, where if they found out that you were a member of an NAACP, you would get fired from your job, you wouldn't be able to get loans. They worked very hard to be able to cut you off on your financial base so that you would not think about doing something like this in the future. And because of this, the NAACP was kind of taking a back seat and didn't want to move forward with anything. And this is where Robert Williams and his base of domestic workers and sharecroppers, and also it was a lot of people who were giving money, but they didn't want a public face. He would attract people who didn't have anything to lose, and then was receiving money from people who had it. Another I don't Another key point in this book is it talks about the Cold War anxiety within the United States government, and it was desperate to win the allegiance of the emergent African and Asian nations. This is very late in the book, and against the Soviet Union. And he realized very early on, before he got exiled in Cuba, that America couldn't effectively preach democracy while practicing apartheid at home. And he used a lot of that ideology against them. Like, how can you say that you're this and when you're really that? And that was what he felt like a linchpin for change, for possibly having change. But he even used that against them when attempting to come back home. Because, like I said, later in the book, he gets exiled first in Cuba, and then he goes and lives in China for several years. But he hated it. He wanted to come back home, and he waited for a moment where relations between the United States and China were had softened enough that they were, looking to try to negotiate, to talk, come to the table, and he used that as an opportunity to come back home. He basically manipulated the situation. He was wanted. He was a wanted. He was on the FBI most wanted list, and then waited till waited them out till the political climate changed, and came on back home, and then he chilled after that. He was pretty quiet. He didn't do much after he got back from exile. Um, this kind of brings us to this point of like, why any of this? Why any of this matters? Why is this important? Well, the legacy of Williams is mostly challenges a lot of this sanitized version of the civil rights movement that we have. It reminds us, it tells us that basic progress is often won through a combination of, diplomatic pressure and being a credible threat to disruption. He wanted you to know that I have guns and I could be a problem, but also I can protest if I need be. I can protest if I want to. I don't have any problem protesting. And if you're going to be a problem, I 100% will shoot you. I am 100% armed. You know, and a lot of this really, really challenged the way I saw with even as somebody who reads a lot of historical books, it really challenges the way I saw the civil rights movement as a whole, and and how it comes off as a bit linear, where it was just like, you know, it's just not, this wasn't really the way it was. Wasn't really the way anything is, right? Anyway. All right. So we're just gonna talk about a couple of the highlights of the book. We kind of talked about what the book was about, but now I'm gonna talk about some of the key moments. The first one I wrote about was of course about how it was defined about the woman being beaten when he was 11 years old, watching her get beat. We're not going to talk about that. We already kind of covered that in depth, and how that set the tone for the rest of his life, and how he, you know, there was a real feeling that if the government wasn't going to protect you, we need to protect ourselves. That's basically how he lived. How he lived. That you needed to have a community of people, and that we all needed to band together and protect ourselves if need be. But another point in his life is in 1946, 1947. There was a man by the name of Biddy Montgomery. He was a black veteran who was executed in the gas chamber for killing his white employer, even though he said it was in self-defense. But it was basically a dispute over wages. Even in his death, the Ku Klux Klan wanted to continue to humiliate him. The Klan was rumored that they were going to desecrate his corpse, and they were going to throw it on the courthouse steps. They couldn't allow that. When Robert Williams, and at this time he was already the president of NAACP, when they heard this, he got together with his group. They were mostly World War II veterans at the time, and when his hearse arrived in Monroe, they surrounded the funeral home and his car with rifles. They didn't have to fire a shot. They just simply stood in formation. While there was a white mob there, and there was police there, seeing what they were up against, they 100% back down. And this was important for him, and it was twofold. It showed him the power of of armed resistance, just being able to defend yourself. But it also rubbed a facade off about the Klan at the time. He talks about in the book how he felt like the Klan could possibly be who they say they are. It could be this mysterious, amoebus, scary entity that they claim to be. And when he saw the fear in their eyes from just them having weapons and them being prepared to defend themselves, he realized it was all a scheme. It was, they were not people that they seemed to be, you know, and it galvanized this idea of armed self-defense in his mind. So after Brown versus the Board of Education, which basically um, integrated public schools, but it also was supposed to integrate public spaces, right? After this happened, there was a huge backlash, like we talked about, towards NAACP, but in towards the idea of integration in general. He wanted to possibly integrate the Monroe pool, the public pool in Monroe. Now, while the pool was segregated, it was built with public funds, and he felt that if it was built with public funds, the entire public should be able to use it. At the time, Black children who didn't have a place to go swim in Monroe during the summertime were swimming in creeks and they were drowning, and while also being barred from using publicly funded schools or publicly funded pools. So Williams and a man by the name of Dr. Albert Perry, which was his homie, led a campaign to integrate the public pool. Now, if it's one thing that white folks at the time and the Klan in general would not stand for, it's integrating public pools. It's not. It's not. It is something about women in bathing suits or sharing a water or play space with Black people that really get them up into a tizzy. It really gets them up into a tizzy. And they started running nightly terror raids through the Black town of the Black section of Monroe. And they weren't going to Robert's house, though, even though he was the president of NAACP at the time. They were going to Albert Perry's house because they felt like because he owned a business, he was a doctor, but he owned his own practice. He was the person. He was the financier. So they started running. Once again, these were guys, everybody here was a World War II veteran. So they started running armed guards at his house. They built entrenchments. They had round the clock. They used to sit in his garage and they had round the clock basically surveillance on his house. And when they would show up, they would get in the trench and they'd be ready for him. And one day they showed up and they fired on them behind their fortifications. And the leader of the Ku Klux Klan at the time was a man by the name of Catfish Cole. After this happened, he ran this group of the Klan completely out of the city of Monroe. This wasn't a riot. It was basically a military operation. They ran it like a military operation, and it demonstrated, at least to Williams, but to the people as a whole, that it wasn't about chaos or violence, but about organized aggression, organized self-defense. And that armed self-defense allowed them to be able to de-escalate white terror in the city of Montgomery. In the city of Monroe at the time. A little slight side note. So after this happens, Catfish Cole leaves the area and he travels to Lumberton, which is a county which is about 4 over from Monroe. If you're going down 74 towards the beach. So like Monroe County is right beside Mecklenburg County, which is the county that I live in, where Charlotte is. To the right of Mecklenburg is Monroe. And then if you go 3 more over, it's Lumberton. Rutherfordton, but he was in Lumberton, the city. Anyway, he goes there, and they have that particular area has a large population of Lumbee Native Americans. If you're aware of the Lumbee Native Americans, they just got their status like maybe a week or two ago. They had been fighting for that for years, with the primary opposition being from the Cherokee, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Native Americans here in the state. But the reason why it took them so long to get their status is because there is this claim that they don't have a history, that they were Black. Basically, the idea is that the Lumbee were so mixed of other tribes and Black people and white people that they were no longer Native, that they didn't meet the standard of what it meant to be Native, so they shouldn't qualify for federal status. Anyway, this is what led Catfish Cole to Rutherfordton, whatever, Lumberton. He was going after the Lumbee because they were of mixed race. There's too many mixed race Lumbee natives down here. We're gonna mess that up. We're gonna get in there. So he has a rally, and the Lumbee show up, 1,000, 2,000 strong, and run his ass out of there too. Run his ass out of there too. It's called the Battle of something. I don't remember. You can go look it up. It's, of course, a Wikipedia page. I think it happened in 1957. But the whole point that I'm trying to make here is that after that happened, there was a comment that said that if the Black population had treated the Ku Klux Klan like we did, they wouldn't even exist. And it shows you how news and how things and how people are treated differently, because the reason why that particular battle is so popular and so well known and so popularized and made the news is because the white population didn't really see the small population of Lumbee as a threat. But they wanted to make it clear and obvious that this was not a plan of action. This is not something that the Black population could subscribe to. We will wipe you off the map if you did this. Like, it's basically looking at you like, oh, that's cute. That's cute and funny how you ran out the Ku Klux Klan and made Catfish Cole run into the woods, leaving his wife, running off on his wife and kids. But the Black population, you can't do that because we'd already done it. We had done it not that long before that. And the reason why they were even there is because of us. But of course, that doesn't make the news. That doesn't make the news because you can't. That's not cute when we do it. It's not adorable when we do it. All right. So this brings us to 1958, 1959, which is the kissing case and the global stage. This is when Robert Williams really blew up on a public stage. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It's basically two Black boys, Hanover Thompson and Fuzzy Simpson. They were arrested, beaten, and sentenced to reform school until they turned 21. And respectively, they were only 9 and 7 at the time. So they turned 21 for playing a kissing game with a little white girl. Local authorities charged them with molestation, and the white press ignored it. So what Williams did is he bypassed the local gatekeepers, and he fired off press releases to the international media. And this caused the story to explode in Europe to the point where a reporter from Europe came here to interview Hanover Thompson and Fuzzy Simpson. And when this happened, the State Department was so embarrassed and humiliated by the protests at American embassies, they were forced to pressure North Carolina's governor to do something, to release the boys, to do something about it. This whole situation made Robert Williams incredibly famous at the time. And this is really when they started to see him, the FBI began to monitor him and see him as a real threat. He was doing press tours. He was talking, walking around, went to other states in Europe and talking about the case and about, his ideas for self-defense at the time in the civil rights movement. And granted, this was 1958, 1959. This is after the Montgomery bus boycott, but well before the Birmingham campaign. So the civil rights movement had gotten started, but it was at a bit of a crossroads because people didn't know what this was going to be. They didn't know what this was going to be. And Robert Williams was taking this by the reins and trying to show you what it could be. This is what my vision for what the movement could be. So this brings us to his tipping point. This is the point where he became he became a bit infamous. This turned him on the bad side of basically everybody. In 1959, there was this incident where two black women were beaten, like in two separate cases, by two different white men. And just so happens their case landed in the courts on the same day, on the exact same day. Now, at this point, the black population was like, yo, let's get these dudes. We're going to kill them. We're going to kill them. If we catch them, we're going to kill them. And Robert was like, chill. We're going to let the court system handle this out and see what happens. On that day, the Monroe court acquitted the man who had beaten the black woman in front of police and another white man who attempted to try to rape, assault. We're going to say assault because I don't want to smoke. Another black woman. In the same day, they acquitted both of them. After that acquittal, after the last one was acquitted, the woman came up to me and said, you did this. To Robert, you did this. This is your fault that this is like this. We believed in you. We believed in your court system. You stopped us from killing them. This is on you. So Robert is furious. He's standing on the courthouse steps, and he declared that since the law would not punish our oppressors, that black people must meet violence with violence. Why you say that? Because he was all over the news. He was all over the news. And this led the NAACP national office fearing that this rhetoric, because right now he is on these courthouse steps as a member of the NAACP. So when they see that, and NAACP was already in battle, they're worried that white folks who don't know anything about, the nuance of the situation is going to just put this with that, put them all together. Couldn't have that. So they were fearing the rhetoric could alienate, their white base. They suspend them. But and not only did they suspend him, but they made at the national convention, which I think happened in 1960, they tried to make a fool out of him. He had rallied the president at the time. God, I can't remember. Roy Wilkins. I think it's Roy Wilkins. Roy Wilkins rallied support against him. This was after Little Rock 9, which Daisy Bates was extremely famous for. She was like, at the time, she was that person in the movement, was Daisy Bates, because of what had happened with the Little Rock 9. And he wanted to get her on board. So he's like, when we get to the national convention, I'm going to have all these people speak. He had Jackie Robinson, Dr. King spoke. He's not even a member. And then at the end, Daisy Bates spoke. But this is a bit where you kind of rub a little bit of the tarnish off of the kind of the movement at the time, because you kind of see a little bit of the inner workings. He basically bribed Daisy to do it. Daisy had been, because she was a member of the NAACP and she was famous for the Little Rock 9, had become a enemy and was struggling to make it. that credit freeze that I talked about was she ran a paper, was hitting her extremely hard. And the NAACP said that they would give her $600 a month for the next couple of years till things settled out. And that was enough. That was enough for her. $600 a month in 1959 is a huge sum of money. You should choose some of the money. So basically, she was bribed. She was bribed to say that. Not that they were friends. Not that they were friends. She didn't really like Roy Wilkins, but the money was the money. And after this happened, to show you how petty Robert was. After this happens, Daisy goes home, and the Ku Klux Klan is threatening to bomb her house. They're throwing rocks through their window. They're shooting at the house at night. And she, Daisy wasn't no punk. She was armed. She stayed armed. She had had armed guards. She had to get armed. She had to go get armed guards, but her and her husband were armed pretty much at all times. And he sends her a telegram. It basically said, "I'm sorry that happened to you, because you sat up there and you voted against me, and this is the very same thing that I was advocating for." So yeah, that was real petty of him. I ain't proud of it, but it's hilarious. It was funny. It was a funny moment. Anyway, this brings us to his national debate with him and Dr. King. Now, it wasn't necessarily a clash of egos. It was more of the movement wrestling with its own identity. And Robert Williams basically trying to argue that meeting violence with violence is just about self-defense. It is not about armed aggression. Not about armed aggression. They're not running around with armed patrols like the Ku Klux Klan, But this is how King attempted to paint him. This is how King attempted to paint him at the time. And King argued that the only way that they could maintain the moral high ground is if they stayed nonviolent. That they couldn't meet the aggressors with the same level of violence that they were. So that is not in order. That's okay. So this brings us a bit to the siege of Monroe. Let me tell you something. Living up the street and not tell you how history is, they don't tell you nothing about it. I had no idea this happened. But basically, in 1961, there was a group called the Freedom Riders, and they were basically the basic idea is that they would ride through the South usually from New York, but they always ended up in Jackson. And this was to test the local to test the desegregation of public bus stations. So they get on the bus, but you couldn't use the facilities. And they were trying to test that by riding the bus all the way to Jackson. Famously, when they got on the bus the first time, they rode through Alabama. They rode through Rock Hill, which once again, right on the street. And John Lewis, who was one of the original Freedom Riders, gets beat up trying to use the restrooms in a bus station in Rock Hill. Famously, when they get to Georgia, they meet with Dr. King and another group, and they have a dinner in a diner, and Dr. King tells the reporter that they'll never make it through Alabama. And they did not. They didn't. They went through Alabama, and I think they were outside of Montgomery, and their bus gets firebombed, and they closed the doors. They were trying to burn them alive. And that forced them out. And when they came out, they beat them with bats and chains. No, it must have been Birmingham. So they sent a second bus to pick them up, and that ended up in Montgomery. And when they got to Montgomery, they were waiting on them, and they got beat. The Freedom Riders again. And at the time, they were worried somebody was going to get killed. And the greater movement at the time, the greater civil rights movement at the time, a lot of the leaders were like, "Bro, y'all need to chill. Y'all gonna get killed." Even to the point where they asked Dr. King to join them on the Freedom Rides, and he was like, "I got stuff. Ooh, is that my wife calling me? I got stuff to do. He did not want any parts of being involved in this because and what he saw, and even when I look back on it, it felt like a suicide mission. I'm surprised that no one got killed because it was totally possible. It was 100% possible. Um, so while this is happening, they decide that they want to come to Monroe to support Robert and bring their non-violent tactics into a very volatile situation. Now, the violence was basically because Monroe at the time was becoming a hotbed, and it was all kind of centered around desegregating the swimming pool in the area. They were adamant that they wanted to do this, and the power to be the local government, the white population, the police were like, nah, it's not going to happen, my guy. It's not going to happen. So they were protesting, and more than once during this time, Robert ran off the road. They hit his car. They tried to run him off the road. They pulled guns on him, and this is where the armed resistance really came in because he had to pull his gun on people multiple times during this incident because they would try to kill him. They tried to kill him, and while the Freedom Riders didn't carry guns, they didn't try to change the ideologies of the local population of Monroe or the people that were with Robert Williams, because at the time he had about 20 or so guys that were with him. You know, he kind of had it was like a gang. It was a bit like a gang. They were ready. They're ready for that action. Anyway, this brings us to the point where one particular day, the Freedom Riders come up to try to protest at City Hall. 2,000 white demonstrators show up because this was a Sunday, and Sundays are when people had off and they have nothing better to do. So they came from out of town, from all over, to try to meet this group of Freedom Riders who were protesting at City Hall with that action, with that work. And while there were police there weren't nearly enough to hold off a mob of 2,000 people. It was maybe 3 or 4 of them. They barely escaped with their lives. The police were piled into the same car as the Freedom Riders, this tiny little car, like a clown car, as they rolled down the street trying to hey, we gotta get out of here. This is crazy work. And a riot started. And so they started beating up every black person they saw. Robert then goes to where his house is. It's on Boyette Street, which is off 74. Once again, I know what this is. I've never seen this house. It doesn't exist anymore, but I know where Boyette Street off 74 is, off Independence. And he turned Boyette Street into a fortification. They had sand fortifications at the streets. At the time, they had been, and I didn't mention this, but they had been sent guns. They had been sent guns because he had become so famous. The person from the Meet Violence for Violence, he had been either given money or sent guns from groups all over the country. Malcolm even sent him money every single time he was in Harlem, because he went to Harlem a lot. He would meet with Malcolm and talk to him. And he also met Fidel Castro a couple times when he came and stayed in a Harlem hotel. He met and they talked. And a lot of that led to him, one, being viewed as a communist, but also helped him ingratiate himself to people that could help him, that could help fund his movement, to help fund his operation. Because he had a bunch of guns. So he had emplacements at the end of Boyette Street. They were ready. They knew that the mob was coming, and they were ready for them to show up. They were running shifts. He was sitting in the house, and as luck would have it, a white couple rode down Boyette Street, the Seagulls, and they drove it to the area, and there was this argument about what they were going to do. about what they were going to do. And the Seagulls did not make this any better. They get out of the car and they like, nigga this, nigga that. I love niggas. I work with niggas. What are you niggas doing? Why you niggas got so many guns? Like, bro, you about to get shot. I need you to chill. So Robert takes him into the house. He takes him to the house with him and sheltered him from the angry crowd. And this is where his kidnapping charges would come from, because the FBI would label this as kidnapping, as him removing them from their car and taking them and holding them against their will in his house. In his house. So while this is happening, he finds out that the National Guard, the governor is sending in the National Guard and police from other parts of the state and to come and get him. He was like, bro, I gotta get out of here, because if I stay here, they're gonna kill everybody. So he has to sneak out in the cover of night. Right? He has to sneak out in the cover of night. Now at the time, the police were had a barricade of their own set up outside of 74 leading to Boyette Street. So he had to get past them for a while. They did not know. One, the FBI and the local police did not know that he was gone for a while. And two, they didn't know how he left. But apparently he had gotten his family, his wife and kids, and they, in the cover of night, made their way out and were picked up by one of his brothers from the NAACP, and they went and drove him to, I think he went to Canada. He ended up moving to Canada. And it was around that time that he ended up on the FBI's most wanted list for kidnapping charges. He has a famous mugshot sheet. And while he was in Canada, they would continue to look for him. They were looking for his connection. They knew he had connections in Harlem. They talked to everybody. It was like the G-men would show up and be like, yo, it could get real bad for you if we find out that you're harboring a fugitive. And nobody said nothing, because Robert was never there when they came there to talk to him. And they even were able to get the Canadian police to, they found out he was in Canada, and they were able to get the Canadian police to go to where he was in Canada, and they showed up after he'd already left. At this point, he had already moved and went to Cuba. He was in Cuba at the time. And he lived in Cuba for a while, and they saw him as this mythical figure, because at the time Castro was trying to align himself with the Black civil rights movement. He felt like the way to make inroads in America was through Black folks who were being marginalized here in the States. And Woodrow Wilson says something to the same. This is 1919. This is way before all this happened. He said basically that the way to, he called it Bolshevikism, but it was, eventually Russia would lead into communism, and communism in the area, and then all of that would end up being labeled as communism. That the way to have a Bolshevik style revolution here in the States is through Black people. And many, many people, even the modern communist movement and in Cuba, all saw this as the way to make inroads in America, is through Black people. So they were largely attempting to try to get in our good graces. And this is where a person like Robert Williams, because he was the perfect person. He was on the outs with the modern civil rights movement, but he had a lot of political power. He's a perfect person. They treated him like a dignitary when he came to Cuba, But as he stayed there, he realized the central problem with communism is communism always, at least when it comes to Black people, they always framed everything as a class issue. That the problem was not racism per se. It was the fact that lower class whites and lower class Blacks didn't realize they were being exploited. And that as soon as they came to the realization that there was a better way, they would all sing Kumbaya and come and shake hands. And Robert Williams is like, bro, that is bullshit. Let me tell you what's going to happen, because I've almost gotten lynched. You did not see that guy. I'm supposed to shake hands with the guy that pulled a gun on me, threw a gun in my face. It's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. And he's trying to convince the Cuban government of this, and they didn't like that. All the while, he is broadcasting from a radio station that he called Radio Free Dixie, where he would play jazz music and talk about political messages, and you could hear it allegedly as far away as Washington State. If you had the right radio station, and they tried to shut him down for a while. And like, yo, what is this? Every I think it was every Sunday at like 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock. They would listen and write down everything that was said by Robert Williams. Like, yo, this dude talking crazy. And he would use jazz as an inroad. He felt like jazz was the perfect medium. Basically, he called it like the music of struggle or something to that effect. Basically, the jazz and that music, the music of that day was a good way to make inroads. Like they were already singing the song of struggle. I would do that and talk about this, and the Cuban government hated it. They hated everything about it. They ain't like what he was doing. They tried to they tried to shut down his radio station. They felt like that what he wanted didn't align with their principles. And as he stayed there, he began to grow sour with his life in Cuba, but he couldn't leave. Fidel would not allow him to leave. He was basically a captive. All the while this is happening, his fame and influence in the States was growing, because this was in the mid 60s. This is when the growing Black Power movement, and they looked towards Robert Williams as like almost like this messiah. Several groups made him like their honorary exiled chairperson, exiled president, because that's the person. This is what they wanted their group. Additionally, during this time, he wrote, along with having his radio station, Radio Free Dixie, he wrote the book Negroes with Guns, which became required reading for the Black Panthers. And while the Black Panthers say that the progenitor, the person that they molded themselves after, or is Malcolm X, they took a lot of their ideology, a lot of their thinking, a lot of their thought processes from Robert Williams and believed in him. So, end of the book, Robert Williams basically tells the Cuban government he's trying to get away. At the time in Vietnam was split into two sides, basically very similar to how Korea is set up now, where it's the North Side and the South Side. And the North Side was communist, South Side was democratic. And he was like, hey, let me go to Vietnam, and then I will spout the same rhetoric, my radio station, to the South Vietnamese, to the American population in South Vietnam. Like, this will work. This is genius. And they let him leave. And as soon as he get out there, he's like, I'm out. See you. Wouldn't want to be you. He's like, I have no plans on coming back. He was not coming back to Cuba. He left Cuba, stayed in Vietnam for a while, eventually ended up in China, where he lived for a while, once again, treated like a dignitary. He met Mao Zedong on several times. And while he found the politics, but basically of communism wasn't his cup of tea, they respected him, allowed him to do what he wanted with some autonomy. They weren't on his neck like that, but he still missed home. He still missed Monroe. He still missed America and wanted to eventually come home. So he formalized a plan that when the political climate was right, he was going to bail. He was going to go back home. And just so happened during the 70s that the opportunity came available, that relations were softening. And he's like, yo, this is my opportunity to get back in the United States. And when he gets back, when I get back, they're going to want to know all about my life in China and what that's like. And that's going to be my way in. So he uses that as as an opportunity. He sends his kids back home, and they end up in Detroit. They don't come back to Monroe. And then he flies on a plane, I think to Europe. And in Europe, they're like, "Psh, chill, stop right there." They detain him for several days and basically have the State Department send a plane of the only person on the plane cost him $22,000 to come get him flying back to the States. Once he gets back to the States, he basically it debriefs him on what it's like in China, and his charges were dropped. And while the State Department was happy, the local police were not. They were like, man, this dude's a terrorist. Get him up out of here. Why is he free? Why is he walking around these streets? When he gets back, though, he's a different person. He doesn't want that smoke. He had basically kind of been softened by his time away and didn't want to get back into the movement. Um, he saw it as a young man's game, and when asked questions about it, he basically was basically preaching that to see things in only black and white was where. Hang on. Oh man, my son don't care what you're doing. Basically that. God, I done lost my train of thought. Oh, basically that the seeing things just in black and white was that's not gonna work. It's not gonna work, not for either side, and that we need to find ways to make it work with each other, to find some commonality with each other. That we're going to be different, but we need to find some commonality. And the Black Power movement was like, get that up out of here, get them ideas up out of here. So he goes and moves to Detroit and lives quietly. He doesn't have any smoke after that. He basically jokes that all the people that were the main activists, they're dead, and that I wanted to live, and for me to be able to live, I needed to be able to chill. I needed to not be the focal point of the feds. And I think being on the FBI most wanted list and having to live in China for a couple of years, probably did that. Probably did that to him. Anyway, man, it's been an hour. I cannot believe, and it's a good book. I do appreciate it. Like to kind of synopsis, sum this up. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely. I like how it shed a light on the nuance of the civil rights movement, and I learned a lot of things about the players, the people in it, and the way they were seen at the time by people. That really opened my eyes to the movement as a whole, and to Robert Williams, because I didn't really know his part to play. I assumed that he was a side character, just this guy in Monroe who had them killed. He had that thing on him. I didn't know. I had no idea what his impact was overall, and it makes me think that a lot of this is possible. That a lot of the things that we've been fed and a lot of things we've been taught sanitizes and washes a lot of people and a lot of contributions out out of the movement, that you don't understand what they had accomplished, because we only focus on a few figures, mostly Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And there were a lot of people who were in it, and there were a lot of people who weren't. It was the vast majority. I remember talking to my dad about this book and him telling me that, like, man, I was trying to chill. My parents sheltered me, talking about him. My parents sheltered me from this movement, and that, like, I wasn't trying to be an activist. I'm trying to have a good time. Like, you forget, like, when you talk about these things and see these things, that a lot of people were like, bro, I'm just trying to go to work. I'm trying to go to work. Like, I'm trying to pay these bills. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to activate this light bill, bro. So yeah, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. If you hadn't read it, if you read it, I'd love to know what you think. If you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. It was recommended to me. Like it was recommended to me, because I think it sheds a wonderful light, and it fuels my cup of knowledge, especially being for somebody who, like, I mean, I read a lot, but rarely do I read an entire book. I read chapters. I think read things that pertain to what I need. I get what I needed. Boom, that's what I need. Blah 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 blah. Put that in a video or whatever. So I think I'm gonna make this a habit. We're gonna continue to make this a habit. If you're unaware, hey, it's a book club. I read Radio Free Dixie. You're free to read it. You're free to tell me what you think about it. I would love to know. Um, Next month's book is Black AF History. I am about a chapter into that, probably around a month from now, somewhere around the third. Whenever that Saturday is, I'm gonna get in here and we're gonna read that again. I mean, we're gonna talk about this in the same fashion. I'm gonna tell you what I think. I can already tell you he got a lot of points in there. He got a lot of areas in here that are well beyond my level of expertise. He already talking about, you know, the settlers and Europeans, the early colonists, and I'm like, I don't know nothing about this. So I hope what he's saying is true because I can't verify. Anyway, I am not going to hold y'all any longer. It's already been an hour. I thank y'all for coming in and joining me and sitting here and listening to me ramble on for the better part of an hour about this book. And I'm glad that if you hung out for this entire time, I am glad that you're here because I had to get this stuff off my brain. It has been sitting on this idea, this book has been sitting on my brain for the better part of 3 weeks, almost the entire holiday season. I had to get it off. And it was nobody to talk to because no one else had read the book with me. Nobody around me read the book with me. So you kind of get this like, hey, did I tell you about the time Robert Williams? Right? like it's only so many times you could tell that I could do it to my wife to where she's like, I don't even know who this is. Don't care. Do not care. Anyway, I'm not gonna hold you guys. It's been an hour. My Panthers come on in 27 minutes. So I got to wrap this up because I am hungry and I got to eat. And I love you all. And I thank y'all for coming out. God bless you. Good night. Peace.